doing podcast or anything with the weird
No,
flickering?
actually, that was the first time I had seen that.
Okay, because it happened on a work meeting as well, like with the work computer. So it seemed the update kind of like gnarled things up a bit. But yeah, I was just saying if anyone did have that problem, apparently if you go into the advanced video settings and turn off the denoiser, that seems to be the issue. So if you run across someone that starts flickering at you, maybe tell them to do that because I've had it several times.
Well, in the words of the great Merlin, the 20th century or now the 21st century, just one big modern mess, right?
That's right. That's right. The other one that really got me was I got a new iPad which has the new iOS, and like GarageBand's like broken on it now, which as someone who makes music sucks. So
Yeah, I've got my PC that I run all my movies through. I got like a little Plex server to keep track of everything we watch, and it's been running like a beast for I want to say like 2 years straight, save for like a couple power outages, and the latest Windows update finally just killed it. Like it's gone.
yeah, so I was gonna give my daughter my old iPad, right? But that's gonna have to hold off a little bit because that still has a functioning GarageBand. So I'm currently going around with two iPads.
Sometimes the limitations are do wonders for the creative process, though, right?
Well, in this case, it's just their update killed it. I was looking online, and a bunch of people are having the problem. There's like no fix apparently. So I guess musicians, it's not priority one for Apple, but
You can use it as a new percussive instrument.
yeah. Otherwise, it's great. It's just this one program just got destroyed by the update. So, but yeah, you find your workarounds, right? I
I mean,
think
honestly, that's what it is now. Like the people that are technologically, efficient, just know how to troubleshoot stuff that just inevitably goes wrong
right.
constantly. And there's like a divide where some people just assume that technology is smarter than you and that maybe you're wrong and the technology is right. But very often it's the other way around. But we're gonna get to like a certain threshold where people are born into the world and they just assume that the robots are smarter and they forgot a time when you had to blow into a Nintendo cartridge for it to load
Well,
properly.
it's like you have people that you don't know how to fix the machines anymore. I mean, that's kind of a sci-fi trope. The
Yeah,
future,
that's one of
everything's
my
automatic,
favorites
and
because I think that's where we're headed anyways. Like we're already
yeah, halfway
I mean
there.
for anyone that's ever worked with like government systems, they like they're still operating on software that was probably written in the 80s or 70s to this day. If you know some old school languages like Fortran or Ada or COBOL, there's actually still a lot of well-paying jobs because it's all dinosaur work, like you got to be an archaeologist in order to do some of it.
Well, I should mention that to my dad. He knows Fortran and Fox Pro and that. Of course, he's
it's
very
it's
retired
out
as
there, man.
well.
Well, that's exactly. I mean, that's exactly why there's still market for it because everyone
Ex-
else is retired.
oh, I was just when I was talking about maybe having to scale back in university. I remember trying to make my first multi-track recordings, or right after I had a friend that had one of the cassette tapes where you could like do tracks. But I remember
Mm.
my dorm room recording something on a tape deck, putting that near another tape deck, playing that and recording on the other tape deck to do multi-tracking, which of course sounds halfway. Well, actually now it sounds like indie cool, doesn't it? But at the time, you're like, oh god, it sounds like crap. But you know,
The one of my favorite albums growing up was Cake Fashion Nugget, and I found out years later that they recorded that whole thing using a bootleg version of Cakewalk on like a crappy old PC, and they recorded it mostly in like a bathroom or something. I'm probably like overstating one of those, but it was very much like the very first recording studio I ever got to work out of, which it was just like a closet that was left over in the rest of the studio, and whoever brought the microphone, that was the microphone for the day.
yeah, the first somewhat, well, the only somewhat professional album I did. Yeah, I was doing the vocals in the restroom. So
Did
just
you
because of
go
the
through any
echo.
any actual multi-track recorders over the years?
Yeah. This was a what was it called? Radium Sound or something near Athens, Georgia, and they did a lot of like the Elephant Six indie rock stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we went there because they still recorded on like quarter-inch tape, and it was 2003, so it was already getting like a little rare. So we were like, we want to do it on tape. So,
Ahead of the
but
curve, ahead of the vintage curve.
yeah, but I guess we should go ahead and jump into the Sword and the Stone. So I'll roll off a quick introduction, and we'll run our way. Welcome to the Occult Disney podcast, where we take a look at animated Disney classics and try to find the secrets hidden behind the mouse. I'm just going to say that
Wahaha.
I'm going to say that a different way every week, I think, and we'll see which one sticks in
We'll
the
land
end.
on something good, yeah.
Yeah. This is Matt here. Joining me as always is Thomas Gorens, the Paranoid American. How are
Thank you.
you?
I'm great, and I'm happy to talk about what used to be my favorite movie.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, let talk a little bit about where this one is on your radar. For me, I think I remember like getting off VHS in the mid '80s and liking it quite well. And then that video store closing and not being able to find this movie for like a really long time. So,
Really?
in fact, the next time I remember watching it was about 6 or 7, oh God, no, almost 10 years ago when my daughter was about 3, 4, and I was just like, okay, let's not watch Dora the Explorer. Let's watch some proper, classic animated films. Although I will say, watching Dora the Explorer at like 6 p.m., like drinking a beer is kind of fun.
Have you picked up any special like phrases or extra skills from that show exclusively?
I don't know. I run around going "hola" a lot, like my
But that
wife.
that
So
counts.
yeah, yeah,
Technically,
yeah.
that makes you multilingual.
That's right. The Japanese version, because we got the DVDs for Dora in Japan, and it's in Japanese. And then when she goes into a different language, that's English. So there's no Spanish anymore.
Dumb question, but do they not have a spin-off Dora that actually is like exclusive to Japan or to,
I don't.
different regions? Because I always assumed that they would like do, how there's like a Russian version of Married with Children, and there's like Estonian versions and stuff. I guess I assumed that those really big franchises broke off and had their own versions.
I think the small children behemoth in Japan would be the morning NHK kid shows, which all look like they were taking a ton of LSD. I mean, they weren't, but in Japan they definitely were not. But yeah, they're just really trippy. I'll send you a clip of that. But
Yeah, please, man. That actually sounds right up my alley.
yeah, yeah. Inai and I Ba is one of them, which is like peekaboo. And the other ones is like it's been running on Japanese television for like 60, 70 years. It's just like sing along with mom, or that's the translation of the show. So
You've piqued my interest. We might have to do an episode just on that.
well, 1 inch, just talking about, like not quite mind control, but they have a dance on this show. It's this giant dog and a little girl, and the little girl always changes every year as the girls age out, right? But
Mhm.
each time they have a new girl, they have like a song and a dance, and you'll just see like 2 and 3 year olds in Japan. They've like memorized like every step of this dance, and are doing it in front of the TV and stuff. So talking about, I mean, it doesn't seem like nefarious mind control, but it definitely is mind control uh, of a certain
Well, I
form.
mean, in like NLP terms, it would be anchoring in some ways, and just like patterning, where you just kind of like rehearse the same thing over and over. But I mean, little kids love, repeating dances, right? Isn't that like one of the most classic things for little kids to do?
Yeah, I'm just watching it thinking, man, I couldn't memorize that dance, but I guess you
You
got
never, I
more of
mean,
an open mind.
you clearly haven't hit the top leaderboards on DDR.
No, when I dance, I look like Groucho Marx basically. So I can do Groucho Marx dancing. That's about it. um,
That
so
would be
any
a little bit creepy, yeah.
so anyway, yeah, I had a fond memory of this movie. Didn't see it for a very long time, and maybe it's just like the third time I saw it last night. But you're
Well,
calling
we
it one of
couldn't
your
be more different. We couldn't be
okay.
more different because out of all of the Disney tapes that I had growing up, I think this one probably got the most plays. It was right around there with Pinocchio and Dumbo, probably. And I think I might have remembered this one as being my favorite because it had very specific scenes that I still remember today, and I loved watching the animation of it again. Although on a rewatch, it wasn't as good as I remember, so I definitely killed a little bit of the magic because I haven't seen this movie for well over a decade. So it was kind of cool going back and revisiting it, and seeing where maybe it was greater or worse than some of the other ones that we've seen already. It's actually really fun watching them all in order like this and seeing the progression, because it's messing with my nostalgia for sure.
Yeah, another thing, I guess because of the way the video boxes looked, I guess a clamshell with the
Hmm.
white box and like the red and orange stripes. I'll be curious how close I was
And it's got
about
like
that.
that puffy touch to it too. That's got like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
tactile.
So I couldn't find
I mean,
this
if you
one.
want to talk about programming, that whole package and the exclusivity of it, and like literally that little puffy feeling where it feels different than just grabbing like a hard pointy square. I mean, have you ever stepped or like kind of gotten hit by the very corner of a VHS box? Like those things will hurt you. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
only a few steps away from a big Lego.
Right, exactly. But because of that video clamshell case, I think I ended up like associating, because like the video store closed, I couldn't get Sword in the Stone, so we were like at a different video store, and oh, this case is similar, so I was expecting it the same feeling from say Darby O'Gill and the Little People or Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, because they specifically had a similar box, right? So
Mhm.
I would rent those a lot, so I probably saw those movies more than this one, but I was trying to see this movie, so
That's it. That's actually interesting. I wonder how many people out there, lean towards getting that certain type of box just because of like the feel and the look. And I guess there was sort of like an implication that it might have been slightly more family friendly. Like I don't think you'd ever see like a Jason or like a Triple X movie that comes in like a puffy box, right?
nice welcoming box. Well, some of those early widescreen VHS might actually tick that, because they were in the bigger boxes. I don't remember if they were puffy, but yeah, you might get a Jason X or something, one of those boxes.
They
So
were so annoying too, though, because you either had to put them on their own shelf or had to have like a non-standard setup, in order to like mix and match regular VHS with the big puffy VHS boxes and all the weird like limited editions and stuff.
another thing that I do pretty much all my reading on a Kindle now, but well, on the Kindle app or whatever. But last when I was buying books regularly, I started to notice after a while that I tended to buy books with like brown or orange covers. Hey, it's those video box covers almost again. Weird. So yeah, programming, anchoring. There we go.
I
That's the
wonder
sword
what
in
you're
my
missing out
stone.
on too. Like what's out there that's like in a pink and green box that you just haven't seen. It might have been like the coolest thing ever.
Well, now that I'm reading electronically, for reading, doesn't the covers don't matter as much, right? So
Except for when you go to buy them, right? I'm sure you're looking at the covers when you go to buy the book for the first time.
yeah, yeah, I guess that's true. But yeah, yeah, I guess it looks like parchment or something. Like a history book on parchment is like my goal for like a cool book or something. I don't know.
So lots of grimoires.
Yeah. I just got someone gave me some books just yesterday, and I'm noticing even those were given to me, and they're in similar colors. Some I Ching and tarot books. So,
You could also just start collecting books based on the color so that you can kind of just, color the room in
color
like an
code your
aesthetic
house.
way. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Those are my horse blinders, right? um. So is this one like Sword in the Stone is no longer your favorite then?
For multiple reasons, but we'll have to slowly ease into it because I'd rather start with all of the parts that I liked about it and some of the very minor criticisms, and then we can talk about why it's maybe not my favorite one anymore.
Okay.
So
I have one sentence just that again. I do
yeah,
like this
I
one
saw
well, but
some of your notes. You got some great ones.
I guess go positive, but the one statement that I kind of came down on at the end is like nothing really happens in this movie.
I saw that and I wanted to disagree so much with
Go,
you because I had some notes that was very like really cool points on how they twist the story and they kind of like make it work for this animated version. But a lot really doesn't happen, right? So they wash some dishes poorly. They just like turn into a bunch of different animals, which is kind of his training. Like that's his main training with the wise old mentor is they get chased by squirrels. They get chased by some kind of like I didn't bother to look up the exact type of fish they're getting chased by, but it's like some nasty fish with like, huge jaw and jagged teeth, and then they turn into birds.
yep.
And that's kind of the entirety of King Arthur's training, and that qualifies him to pull a sword out, and then you get the end, and then it ends abruptly. So that really is like that's the entire story.
Yeah, yeah. So I now in this case, like I know in some of the earlier films, I was like, man, they're really padding out for time. Here, it's like, well, all the vignettes kind of work. I mean, you actually like if we did take out those little animal adventures as 8-10 minute cartoons, they all work quite well, and they work quite well together because they're similarly themed. But when we're talking about the Arthurian legend, and it's kind of like a squib. It's like, oh, you like Darth Vader? Well, here's a child, and he's sad, as Patton Oswalt did in his bit.
Yeah, this is a little bit of like an Anakin story in that way, right? The young kid that's like thrust into to leadership before he's kind of ready for any of it. But I agree. So I do agree begrudgingly that there is no real story here compared to what it's really about. But it's sort of like those training wheels that are supposed to get you interested in riding like a real bike, right? So maybe you see this movie and then you get interested in the actual Arthur, Arthur's tales and Merlin, and because that's actually a really cool backstory when you get into like the historical equivalents of some of the things that they're based on. But the movie itself, I love it because you can look away and look back and know exactly like the progress in the movie. Like so many other movies we've seen before, maybe outside of Pinocchio, but they don't like change incredibly visually. They keep revisiting like the similar, locations. And this one, it's just like they completely change and morph into completely different animals. It's like a different musical theme for each one. And I love how quickly it kind of moves through them all,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
lots of like comic animation, like overextended animation, where they're getting like a lot more cartoony, I think, than some of the previous ones.
I know in my house, I'm pretty yeah, we had the Once and Future King on I think hardback on the bookshelf. I don't think I quite made the connection because it doesn't like say King Arthur, right? For an 8-year-old that matters, and it was like way too thick, so I never actually read it. um I'm not
Well,
sure if I
and well, it was like a compilation of multiple books that came out as the. I'm gonna get some of this wrong because I'm definitely not an expert on it, and I haven't read them all. But it was like four, and then a fifth one came out after he died that was supposed to wrap up, but it didn't. It was supposed to be released, but World War II was happening, and it was passing this message of like pacifism, which wasn't super popular at the dawn of World War II. So it kind of got suppressed and wasn't released with the rest of his big stories. But the actual story is quite long, and I basically forms the basis of things that many people have seen, like Harry Potter. Neil Gaiman said that his version, which was what, King Percy and versus, I can't remember the name of it. It was this one and Harry Potter always get conflated, and he basically said they both were just ripping off of this story.
here I got the titles for you. The Sword and the Stone is the title of the first one, which is basically what this kind of, well, is as far as a Disney movie ever is its source material. The Queen of Air and Darkness, The Ill-Made Knight, The Candle in the Wind, a charged title these days, and the posthumous one is The Book of Merlin.
There you go.
I'm also noting that this first edition is the one that was on my bookshelf. So I wonder if I should tell my parents it's of some value or not. I don't know. Looks like they at least have the cover of a first edition. So, because yeah, that's the thing. The spine of the book and the cover of the book really did stick in my mind. The Once and Future King, I was like, that's confusing, right? So, but I was kind of like intimidated by it as a kid. I don't know if I'd enjoy it though. I can't get through Tolkien, so
I don't know if it's Tolkien. I mean, actually, I don't think it would be equated as much because Tolkien loved getting into like names and locations, whereas this one was really about this guy's struggles as a kid coming out as, him becoming this legend and being magical and being able to sort of like replace his childhood through these stories. Well, again, like the historical aspect of this where it starts getting really sad.
now something I guess the book gets in. This is almost the reason I kind of like would like to at least maybe stick my nose in a little deeper. I'm pretty confused about Merlin, and this movie definitely kind of like, I mean, they make him like they hint like Merlin is basically living in through time backwards, is it?
So I think that Merlin exists outside of time. Like he doesn't adhere to the same rules that mere mortals would be adhering to. So like for example, he jumps over to Bermuda, right? And he
Yeah.
specifically talks about the 20th century and he comes back and he's wearing like sneakers and like a button-down shirt. So he's clearly coming from the 60s, which is when, came out in 63. So he kind of came out bounces over to the 60s and then jumps back, and I think the story is supposed to take place around the year 1100, and that's kind of reconfirmed because at one point he shows the map and it's a flat earth. It says terra firma, and then he shows that, oh, here's this globe that's going to be invented in 1492, and he kind of hints and explains a little bit of that to Arthur or Wart, that this isn't what the world is now, but it's what it's going to be in the future. So he clearly has like lived in all these different time periods or has been through them all. I don't think he had like a Benjamin Button Matrix thing where he was going from future to past. I think that he just gets to jump around. And my note here was like, it's almost like Quantum Leap, he's kind of like Sam Beckett a little bit.
Merlin
And
never
a little bit of
returned
Al.
home.
He's a little bit of Ziggy too, like the forgetful weirdness of Ziggy. We always got to like slap it on the side of the head to get the right answer.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I guess I like being confused by that. That's like kind of the fun of the story in a way. Like, what is this guy?
Well, he's blasted out of his mind the entire movie, clearly. Like he can't even leave the house without getting his beard caught in the door, after he's just been like smoking on his pipe the entire time. So they set like a very specific archetype for this bumbling old man, which I kind of liked, but I didn't remember that as much as a kid. That was one of the things that stood out, was like, wait a minute, Archimedes is actually the brains of this operation, and he's kind of, Pinky.
Yeah, it's like he's got what is his magical tobacco and magical mushrooms and all of that to keep him magical, I guess.
And he lives out in the middle of the woods, and he just like turns into animals and just kind of like chills with nature all day. So he's definitely representing this kind of like nature magic, which is interesting. Since they're asking him at one point, they're like, well, you don't do that black magic, do you? And he's, oh no, I don't do any of that. But clearly, I mean, some of the things that he does in this movie, I would assume would be black magic. Like
Yeah,
he turns into a German and essentially could have killed somebody, which feels to me like black magic.
yeah, he's a tool is a tool. So you can on a dime, I guess, use it a different way, right?
So I didn't believe him there. I think that was just to make sure that he didn't die, because they probably would have killed him on sight if you admit to being a black magician. Although they also seem kind of scared of him, even though the strangest thing that he did to the dad was made it snow on him, and that was enough to scare him off.
Yeah, yeah, they did. Yeah, they're those are quite forgettable characters, aren't they? I mean, like Wart or Arthur and Merlin and Archimedes all stick in your head quite well, and the
Well,
ginger's just kind of popping in and out.
they don't get a lot of screen time, and also it's interesting because there's almost like a fight over who gets to be the dad originally. And first they're talking about how Arthur Pendragon is like an adopted orphan, and that he's just looking after him, but he's not like his real dad. And then Merlin is basically stepping in and trying to be that father figure, which is kind of, there's like some creepy connotations to that, I think.
But the old
But
the
and
old
they also
the old
represent
lech.
obviously the smart versus the bronze thing, right? So like the redheads are like the brawny knights, and that represents strength and brute force, and as they say, like predators and searching for prey. And then Merlin is kind of like this effeminate, intellectual, time traveling, artistic guy. So it's this constant battle between, are you going to pursue these like lofty magical arts, or are you going to go and work into manual labor? And that's sort of like the other context behind all of that.
But the climactic moment of him getting the sword is just dumb luck. I mean, he's just running through the alley like, I gotta find a sword, right? I mean, there's
Well,
no.
I mean, but if you follow the premise of the movie, it's not dumb luck, because when it first starts, Merlin already knows like where this kid's at and what he's going through at that moment. Like, you know, like when they're shooting the arrow and they miss and he has to run into the woods, like Merlin already knows all these things are happening, which again is, I couldn't not think of Quantum Leap, because Quantum Leap, they go back into the past, but they already know what's supposed to happen, and they just have to like make sure that the certain milestones actually happen in order to get that final outcome as it is in the history books. So it almost feels like maybe Merlin's been through this a few times, and this might just be, you know, try number 50 something for him. So it might not be like this very specific linear past. I think that he's got that kind of ability that he can, you know, try this over and over again, which makes even more sense when he like hops over Bermuda. He might have like went all the way back and restarted to before they met again, and then we see the movie as Arthur's ready for that you know, sword in the stone. But the point being is that the entire movie, it's all about Merlin directing him towards the exact events that need to happen in order for him to pull that sword out, which is a big plot gap in my opinion, because he's not ready for it. Like, this kid is way underqualified, but I feel like it was architected in that way. And
Yeah,
maybe I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
giving too much credit to Merlin because he's got a sick beard.
That's why he's giving a almost literal crash course. And now you're making me think like how many iterations of this did Mort meet horrible deaths as an animal, you know? Because all of the animal adventures seem quite dangerous.
Well, and they also pick like very, very fragile sorts of ecosystems in order to prove themselves, right? Like they don't immediately turn into elephants and then figure out the natural predator for that, and they don't turn into some kind of animals that would get hunted by humans. That would have been interesting if his brother ends up hunting and like killing Merlin. That would have been a little bit more engaging. But yeah, it's the animals they choose to turn into is weird, especially when you look at the backs story of the author, which again I'm going to keep teasing some of these little notes, but he ends up in real life moving out into the woods and kind of becoming like this feral, you know, woodsman, or at least he wanted to be. And it didn't go so well for him, but he wanted to train hawks, and rewatching some of these scenes where the hawk is this big predator that's taking out the prey. In real life version, the actual author of this would have been absolutely massacring those little squirrels, you know, day in and day out, because he was training this hawk to go out and hunt. So, you know, the actual predator in one of these sequences is a hawk in the sky. So it was just a interesting dichotomy there.
I was also thinking, watching this movie this time, of especially some of the Western tribes in the States with sort of a, is I guess that's kind of the Skinwalker vibe, like inhabiting an
Being
animal
able to
form.
shapeshift, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That the Skinwalker version, of course, being a creepier version of it, but I guess that's. I mean, I always get a smell of black magic on that, but I guess you could also use that for something useful. We just, you know, it's fun to
I
talk about
still
the
think turning
monstrous
into a
versions.
germ is way creepier than any Skinwalker story.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I guess you're teasing the author, and we'll get to that, but just as far as
Yeah, we've
production.
got plenty of animation notes here too.
Well, I was actually just going to jump into, this is the start of the Sherman brothers doing like everything for Disney for the next 20 years or so. I mean, they do the movies, they do the rides, you know. Are you
I
familiar
didn't know
with
they
it?
did the rides. Oh, you mean the animation for the rides?
Oh, I'm talking about the music.
Mm, mm, mm.
Like because it's a great big beautiful tomorrow is their song, and what are some other ones? But yeah, they do this. I think they do a lot of the music for the Jungle Book, for Aristocats, and so on. So they become a pretty notable part of Disney for about 20 years from this point on.
So one of my favorite songs, I had to look up the lyrics because I swear that what I was hearing was not the same as what was posted on some of like the TV scripts, and I had to re-listen to it a few times and then resource some of them. But some of the audio for it, it's you see my boy, it's nature's way. Upon the weak, the strong ones prey. The human life, it's all so cruel. The strong will try and conquer you, and that is what you must expect unless you use your intellect. So that story right there, I mean, that I think fits the author so well, but also it was such a like a weird dark sequence, the way that they sing it, and he's kind of like humming them to himself. It's at the very tail end, and technically that little some of those little quotes are after like the quote unquote song ends, and turns into like movie dialogue, and that's why I wasn't finding it in all these different lyric source and TV script, because it would always like end at the end of the song and then not show this extra little bit. But I just thought that that was uniquely dark and insightful.
Mumbling universal truths, I suppose. um, well, let's I guess let's talk about the author a little bit because I'm not particularly familiar. I actually had to I had to check. I was wondering if TH meant that it was because like a lot of female writers would use initials to mask the fact that they were female. But yeah, this is Tim, so that's not a lady.
Yeah, and I didn't know a whole lot about him either. It was just a name that I'd heard before because of just sort of like history trivia. And looking into him, it was this weird recurring theme that keeps coming up. And I'm not even going to go into like the intricate details, but he essentially was an old dude that became very fond of a young boy and developed affections to him. And then it got to a point where it became creepy, and the kid and his mom sort of like cut off contact with him. And it was this kid named Zed, I guess, and it kind of like haunted him for the rest of his life, and it ostracized him, and he felt that he couldn't develop regular relationships with people, and this is why he kind of turned to nature. He ended up getting the hawk. That went horribly well for him, or it went horrible for him because he didn't know how to train a hawk. I guess he overfed it a little bit because he just kept trying to treat it so that he would bond. And I guess in order to actually train a hawk, you kind of have to starve them a little bit and keep them in that fight or flight mode of survival, and then you become their only source of food for a while until you train them to hunt. Well, he skipped that part and just fed it all the time, thinking that it would become his friend, and it was just like, well, I don't need you, I'm full all the time, like what good are you for? And it just flew away one day, and that was the end of it, and he wrote a book about it. But it's interesting because I guess as an early age he got ridiculed and bullied, and it just like completely devastated him. I guess he just felt withdrawn from society, and he had some quotes out there about how he was more afraid of humans than of God, or like I'm paraphrasing that a little bit. But that this experience of him just going through school and being bullied and tormented just absolutely shaped his entire view of the world. And this is where the roots of this story really come from. And the creepy connotation here is that if you rewatch the movie with this backstory in mind, it's about this old dude that lives in the middle of the woods that creeps up on a little kid and takes him away from his family and wants to become the father figure because he sees this spark in him, and that he puts his all into everything, and if only I can turn him in the right direction, then he'll be able to pull this sword from the stone. And if you want to get into the occult symbolism, pulling a sword from the stone is essentially removing the active masculine aspect of something from the passive feminine aspect. So he wants this little kid to go out and remove the sword, from this passive stone, which it's super weird, and it ruined the movie a little bit for me.
Well, I think we've been finding on this podcast, the more whimsical the original author, the more disturbing their history gets.
Well, and not just that, there's an extra level to this particular movie, and I hope I'm not just like reading into that and then seeing it, like predictive programming myself into seeing things that aren't there. But it seems like they do lean into that archetype a little bit in a few of the dialogues and just like the things that they say. But maybe there's just something inherently weird in Western culture, at least, about old dudes that are unrelated to young kids, and seeking them out and wanting to be the mentor, like actively, to the point where they're like, actually no, I'd rather kind of just fight and be a squire and wash dishes. I don't really want to do all this weird nature stuff. And it's like, no, trust me, like this is the right way. I don't know, there's the very weird aspect of that, watching it as an adult with the backstory of all that.
But yeah, I mean, this movie was on such a simmer because this was one of the ones that was on like they were thinking of doing it before World War II, and had to go off to the war films instead. And this got greatly delayed, but it showed up at kind of a, this is actually a pretty solid time in, I guess, American society for this, because they the musical Camelot was 1960, so that was on people's minds. The Kennedy presidency was seen as Camelot too. So it was a good time, I guess, for this legend to hit. Although, yeah, I
And he
mean,
got to see all of it too in his lifetime. He got to see all of these reproductions, or a great number of them at least.
they didn't show this one in the woods, did they? No. I did see he died on a boat on a lecture tour, so he did leave the forest sometimes,
Oh
apparently.
yeah, well again, he sucked at it. It was less of a Walden experience of like I want to rely on myself, and it was more of I just hate people so much. He was such a misanthrope that he just wanted to become a recluse, but then realized that he never developed like all of the survival skills that it takes to become a full-on recluse. So he ended up dying on a cruise ship, I believe,
Yeah,
of like
that's
a
what
heart
I
attack.
saw.
Yeah, so yeah, he clearly didn't. The life wasn't cut out for him. He moved out. He fattened up a hawk that ran away, and then he wrote a sad book about how much he sucked at training hawks, and then went back into society.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, it's just then you get the weird leching, which is just like that doesn't sound fun. Um, one of the let's see what I got. Merlin is so high. Merlin is a shade away from dementia. Uh, what do you got for me? I guess we're reading weird notes at the moment.
Well, honestly, the difference between being a magician and having dementia might be quite of a blurred line, because to any outside observer here, and you had a note that was interesting that his magic has no power over you if you don't actually believe in it, right?
Yeah, that's he kind of mentions that, like if especially when he's I guess taunting the father and the surrogate brother, that he's like, well, if you don't believe this, it's not going to happen. But that is notable because just how you see your own reality, and if you're not willing to accept those sorts of things, you're not going to see that sort of thing.
But well, I guess in that context, in that exact context that you just laid out, what would be the difference between dementia and just like a shared hallucination? It would just be the difference of you don't see the same thing, but the second that you agree with it, if you can also see it, then it's almost like a contagious form of dementia, which in itself might be like the big battle scene, right, where they're changing into different animals, or even when Arthur and him turn into squirrels and the fish and the birds. Maybe that's all just him putting him under spells. And again, it might be maybe Arthur wanders into this old dude's shed in the middle of the woods. He offers him a drink and a smoke, or maybe just the contact high, and the rest of the movie is just a dream sequence.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird twist of the Carlos Castaneda Don Juan sort of vibe, where Carla, keeps stumbling into Don Juan's, well, in the desert in this case, and having to fight the not fight, but get past the guardian of the threshold sort of stuff. I mean, that's kind of what we're seeing here, I guess.
That's an interesting one too. I remember on a tangent for that when I read it, I completely read it as a fictional account that might have been inspired by real life experiences. But there was a slightly small little uproar where apparently it was originally written and professed to be like 100% accurate story, and then it came out later. It was like, oh yeah, it was actually just kind of like a story, not like a biographical account. I don't know if you ever heard any of that.
Oh yeah, I heard plenty of that. But when I read them, I mean, you're really in there for like the ideas, which, I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't know who's reading that book and expecting a historical biographical account that they can look back up and use in like a research paper. It was very much a subjective version of, something that you couldn't really record.
I think it was being pushed as maybe anthropological, so people in that discipline were not particularly happy.
Okay, yeah, just kind of like filling in the gaps. Like, oh yeah, there was a shaman dude and he had like a bone through his nose and he gave me a mushroom.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe he was just, Carlos might have just been getting high in the desert and trying to put a nice narrative on it. So, but yes, if you're looking from like a academia anthropological perspective, he's definitely committing some sins there.
I mean, on that same note, is there anything wrong with portraying Merlin as just having like this pointy hat and a gown? That almost feels like shoehorning Merlin into a very specific type of practice and culture that he might not have originally been part of.
Yeah, but this, I think this is the first image that comes to mind now when people say Merlin. I know there was like a BBC Merlin show like 10 years ago that I didn't see, and I think they, went and had him look maybe young. I think it's like young Merlin or something, but
That's actually a great point with the little pointy hat and the long wizard beard and even the glasses. But the old man Merlin with that pointy hat, it does get established very early on by Disney, and I wonder too if you want to go back into the programming aspect, right? It's almost like there would be a fight for who can decide what these evergreen, everlasting characters that are gonna, possibly last for hundreds of years beyond this. Whoever gets to make the most impactful character and instill that in everyone's mind kind of wins. And Disney very likely takes up a non-zero percentage of many people's brains on the planet just from things that you might not even realize, right? I found out the other day that technically Disney gets royalties from Insane Clown Posse albums, and that the Great Malenko was produced under one of Disney's record labels at the time, but Disney themselves actually make all of the royalties off of the Great Malenko ICP album. So I'm just throwing this out there because Disney's influence on pop culture and what you consider to be magic and wizards and everything, like it's almost the same conspiracy theory where Stanley Kubrick directs 2001 Space Odyssey and then also directs the NASA moon landings because he is first establishes with the world, here's what space looks like, here's what zero gravity looks like, here's how things work in space, here's how the technology kind of looks. And then once everyone kind of agrees, like, oh, okay, that's what the movies say, that's what space looks like, then they can direct the moon landings and show you that same sort of physics and the same sort of, aesthetic, and they've already kind of like pre-planned it. So I think there might be something very similar going on in Disney on all these other aspects, right? Like here's what magicians look like, here's what magic looks like, and then they get to like own that. So then if they actually do real magic, they can purposefully make sure that it's nothing like the way that it's depicted and vice versa.
yeah, we saw, as we called Fantasia, the casting of the Disney spell. I mean, this is that Sorcerer's Apprentice strain. I mean, Merlin is much more, like whimsically lovable in this movie, of course, than the magician, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but kind of the same vibe otherwise. Even here, Mickey Mouse, he screwed up when he tried to do the cleaning spell, but Merlin's at least together enough to pull that one off.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that one up because I wonder what the difference is between a malevolent wizard that is, I mean, technically Mickey screwed up in Fantasia. He wasn't supposed to get in over his head and, take over. That was almost like if Arthur just tried to go and rip the stone out of the sword before he had any training, before he had any kind of magical knowledge. But in this case, the wizard is just sort of absent, and he's not really together. Like Archimedes is absolutely the brain. He saves his life a couple times. He knows the spells that the wizard can't remember because again he's blasted out of his mind. So without Archimedes, this is just a tragedy, every single time. He has to keep replaying this version of history until he gets it right so many times, which is why I think it's at least in the double digits by the time he actually gets Arthur into that chair. But it almost feels worse. Like as a kid, you don't want the mean wizard, right? You want the nice, friendly wizard that's like laughing and joking with you and he's your pal. But in reality, you kind of needed that mean wizard of Fantasia to prevent Mickey from creating all this nonsense. And here, Merlin, without Archimedes, this kid dies every single time, right? 10 times out of 10, the kid dies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little bit different than the Pinky and the Brain thing in that Archimedes has the brain. Merlin does have the ability, but yeah, he doesn't have the brain.
But his ability, we've established though, his ability might very much just be a con man. He might just be such a good soothsayer that he convinces you that his magic is real, but it might not be real because if you don't believe in it, then it doesn't have an effect on you, which means that it's not real.
Well, that's still a notable ability to have if you can pull that off.
Yeah, I
Conning
suppose
conning
so.
people is a good ability.
But again, the connotation of an old con man that lives in a shack in the woods taking your kid away is way different than a wizard that's going to magically train you, right? Like the two of those are the exact same thing, but they have vastly different sales pitches.
And then we got Madame Mim, who is all like malevolent whimsy. Like she just
And
wants to destroy you. I'm going to destroy you. She keeps saying that, right?
and this is probably like one of the most interesting tropes to me is this like mean old haggard witch, because the roots of this is really prior to social security and like welfare services. Once you had this old maid and her husband would die, so you'd have like an old widow in town, everyone would just see this poor old lady kind of like rotting away. And if you didn't live in a nice neighborhood, and we're talking 1100s or earlier, but you see this old lady that's widowed, living by herself, that's just a burden of society, always complaining because she's aching and she's probably got some things wrong with her. So people would start to develop stories about, oh, that old lady, she's a witch. And this sort of turns into that archetype of like the old angry witch with the pointed hooked nose and the mole and everything. Because the more that you denigrate these, your aging population, it's so much easier to avoid them or think that they've brought this old age and all of the ailments on themselves because of all the black magic they've done over a lifetime. And it's really kind of a wicked nasty backstory for that entire archetype, because it justified abandoning old people. And once a lot of those kind of villages and different municipalities began starting their own versions of like prototypal sort of social welfare programs, that archetype slowly started going away, at least in the same amount that it used to be around. But it lives on today. So you still have these like ugly old witches, and it really just refers to, an easy way to ignore old people.
No, when you were talking about that, what started popping in my head was the somewhat more modern equivalent of the old lady in Donnie Darko, if you've seen that movie, because that's kind of how they're viewing her. It's a lady who's, just that getting, and she's in the December of her years, she's not all there, and they're kind of like creeped out about her in a similar way.
So what makes Merlin any different than a crazy old cat lady? I mean, he's just a crazy old owl guy, right?
Well, he isn't directly threatening to destroy you. I guess that helps.
I guess.
I mean,
I
Madame
mean,
Mim is the fear personified of what people think of the old ladies. It's like this is who they think she is, and she is in this movie.
but at least you know what you're getting into. With Merlin, he just cons you into death, right? He just cons you into like, turn into a fish and swim with me. All you got to do is believe, and then you immediately get eaten because his owl was asleep and didn't wake up at the exact right time. So I still, again, I think in practical sense, at least Mim would give you a better chance of survival than Merlin would.
You sucker puncher, if you need to.
and
Um,
and I want to add a little bit of credit to my theory here that this is all fake and con man, or that he was luring this kid here, in that the very original meeting starts when he causes his stepbrother, not his stepbrother, but his adopted brother. Causes him to shoot the arrow out in the middle of the woods. I don't know if you've ever shot arrows into woods before, but if it leaves your sight, like you're not finding that arrow ever again. It would take such a long time to find it. And he just runs into the woods and immediately sees it, which makes me feel like the wizard had put these arrows, like a little like breadcrumbs, the same way that almost a reverse Hansel and Gretel, where he was leading this kid into his hut.
Maybe. No, yeah, I'm always, I love the theory that turns the thing you watched on end. So and then getting into his place, I do have the note, is the tea kettle experiencing a Beauty and the Beast kind of hell. This is going back to Merlin does magic. If you've had a few of his mushrooms, maybe the not the tea kettle will move on its own anyway. But do you remember that there's kind of a cartoon tea kettle like trouncing around on the table?
I'm trying to remember a little bit. I don't remember that exact scene. No, is this when they're doing the washing scene?
No, this is right at the beginning when he first goes to Merlin's hut, and
Okay.
I believe, yeah. Actually, Yeah, now I'm not sure. Okay. Anyway, I just started thinking of Beauty and the Beast, which is a movie I haven't seen yet, by the way. So
You mean ever?
ever. That's one I just always skipped. Um
How did you skip that? That was peak 90s, wasn't it? It was like 96 or something.
I think it was like 91 or 90. It was a little earlier than that. Yeah, that's right in the Disney thing. I think I just didn't like the song and I was 12 years
91.
old and that'll keep you out, right? I don't like
Yeah,
this
I guess
song.
so. I guess so. I don't know. I feel like I didn't get to make my own movie watching decisions until I was at least 13. I don't know if I was making my decisions at 12 yet.
Might have helped I was an only child, so
Okay.
I did see Little Mermaid. I like that fine. Probably at someone's birthday party the first time, but yeah, yeah. By Aladdin, I think I knew to go see them in a theater. So
Well, I mean, Beauty and the Beast also, once you start applying it to practical reality, has lots of very strange connotations to it for
oh,
sure. And
recently I have a friend that just, hates that movie because of finds it dark, like, like the concept of it so dark. He's like, I don't like that one. So
I mean, the morals that it teaches are kind of horrendous, right? The actual story that you take to heart.
yeah, yeah. So Stockholm syndrome, the movie, I guess. I don't know. But
Although I'm very pleased at the TV series that came out. I think it was also either the late 80s or early 90s called
Linda
Beast.
Hamilton.
It was an amazing fever dream of a show, and I just remember it always being on as I was a little kid, and even as a little kid, like, this is some really weird acting and a really weird plot line. Like, there was something that's just inherently sort of strange about a woman falling in love with this huge animal,
Yeah,
which I think ties into this too, right? There's a scene here where we've got some squirrels that may or may not have, gone differently.
yeah, they broke that younger squirrel's heart. I
Well, and I had a note here that Merlin was okay with it. It feels like he was almost like nudging this little kid to, go ahead. He literally says something like nature is going to take its course and you can't do anything to stop it.
let the squirrel do it to you. I had this weird false memory. I for some reason I was like expecting Merlin to turn the squirrel into like an actual girl, which would also be weird because going from human consciousness to animal consciousness is one thing. I always like, what happens when you go the other way?
Well, it's got a very Greek and Roman god feel to it, right? Like Zeus turning himself into various animals just for that explicit sort of insider act.
Yeah, yeah. But I got curious about the reverse. Like the squirrel is now in a human body. How does that work? Like
I
going the
mean,
other way.
as long as you believe in it, it works, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole rule. As long as you think that it's the what needs to happen and you can visualize it, then it happens.
I don't know. I
Which,
don't think squirrels probably don't believe in anything.
I mean, that squirrel believed in something for sure.
Okay, true. That is true. Yes. But yeah, that I guess there's an unexplored thing in this. Just thinking consciousness and man, do we have much on that in general? I'm just saying you're thinking that's fascinating where you take the cat and then put that into the human mind because we always think of taking the human mind or the god mind with Zeus or something and put it into the animal experience, but the animal going into the human experience, that's potentially really disturbing.
Have you ever heard of something called a humanzi?
Oh no, you're gonna have to go on about that.
So, oh man, okay, all right, I'll have to look some of the specific details up. I'm gonna paraphrase some of it, but humanzi was created. It was a rumored creation. It was a hybrid between a human and not a chimpanzee, but apes. And the original concept was, I think, a Russian scientist named Ivan Ilovich or something, and he was tasked with creating super soldiers, and his idea was to basically find a way to breed apes with human females and create some kind of like a super soldier species, sort of like how you can breed a horse and a donkey and get a mule. So that was the general premise of it, but the very intended outcome was very much to have a huge, super strong, jacked ape-like creature that had at least half of the intellect of a human, like something like a halfway point between, an ape and a human being, but that you could also train, and that the Russians would be able to send these guys out into battle as the front lines and just devastate the armies that came in their paths. And the theories is that he was able to make some successfully, but they were just like absolute abhorrent, mutations of nature that never should have existed, just complete abominations. But that I'm sure someone has tried it, and I do believe deep down, without even joking about it, that at some point we've had an animal in control of a human body, just because the CIA was bored that day.
Yeah, yeah. It always gets down to the just because we can do it, does that mean we should do it?
If you ever want to ruin your afternoon, just look into old Soviet experiments on dogs. And they've got
Oh,
video
yeah.
footage
Okay.
of, yeah.
We
And,
were just
and and
talking.
it's not even gory or gruesome. I mean, it is in concept, but it's almost in like a Metropolis sort of way. Like, it's so surreal, but it's also mind blowing at the things that they're able to do. So if you have any sort of doubts that anyone would try it or that it would even be possible, it seems like it's very much yes to both. Yes, people will try it, and yes, it's possible.
No, we were just on a podcast yesterday talking about the Russian sleep experiments, also with disturbing connotations.
What are the Russian sleep experiments?
That's where they would basically keep people awake for like days, months, weeks, just insanely long time of not going to sleep, and they'd go completely mad and start like mutilating themselves and stuff, having
You know what years that
hallucinations.
was? Was
uh
that was that before MK Ultra?
I think so. I want to say it was the early 50s, so this makes sense.
Well,
You still have Stalin
technically
hanging
that would
around.
be after MK Ultra, because depending on where you want to throw the dart on the board, it kind of starts around 1947 or so, and then officially in 1953. But of that research came out of um some notes they found in the Dachau concentration camp about mescaline and all sorts of. This goes into schizophrenia. You mentioned dementia earlier. Like, this is the origins of dementia and schizophrenia research, and it dovetails directly into black magic, ironically, because around that same time period, maybe 3 or 4 decades prior to us discovering those notes, mescaline becomes a steadfast in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which then basically turns on to Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley's original upbringing and his like getting his magical training wheels was pretty much on the backs of peyote and mescaline. So there's this very direct line you can draw from dementia and schizophrenia research to psychedelics to black magic. Like, the line between those three doesn't even deviate or take a curve at any point. It's a straight line through all 3 points.
The theory on these sleep experiments is 1947, but there's also talk of creepypasta and stuff. So I'm not sure about the veracity. It might just be a really good story.
Well, so if you want a really creepy version of this, if you ever heard of Dr. Ewan Cameron.
Oh yeah, psychic driving. Yes.
So in addition to his psychic driving, which is where you would just listen to like a tape on repeat, he did also things where he would keep you awake for long stints of time, but he also did the opposite, where they would do coma induced sleep and keep you in sort of not like an actual coma where you're completely gone, but you're just out of it for like 72 days straight, and then snap you back into it. And if you didn't snap back in, it was just like, oh, I guess we're gonna need another Timmy.
Another one down the pipe. Yeah. I'm actually doing another podcast at the moment on the 60 series, The Prisoner, which every other episode has like something very Ewan Cameron-y in it. This where they're playing mind games with everyone. Interesting series if you're not familiar with, and very very good for mind control vibes and stuff.
And there's been a couple remakes of that too, I think. Are you watching the OG original Prisoner?
We're doing OG. I've never seen the one from later. Who is, I want to say Adrian Brody and Ian McClellan, maybe something like that, is the more recent one. It was not well reviewed, for
No.
better or for worse, but we might chase it with that and see what's up with it a bit. So because I was curious to see that sort of thing, updated, even if it's not good. It's just interesting to see how society views this kind of story differently now.
But so to tie that all back in, because it was a little bit of a tangent, but it's 100% related, because this movie, I think, is that blend of, you know, this interesting time of after MK Ultra has been in full effect. So we can no longer at this point deny that Disney might have some kind of MK Ultra influence in some direct way. In this movie in particular, I can't prove any sort of like research that the CIA was telling Disney what to put in this movie, especially since Disney was probably so occupied with other projects at this point. But it's like MK Ultra has been around for 15 years at the bare minimum at this point, and the concept of predictive programming is not new. And at this point, they've also mentioned Alice in Wonderland programming in CIA training manuals, talking about giving people psychedelics and keeping them into these crazy. And I think we went into that in Alice in Wonderland episode. But at this point, the CIA has written about Disney stories in their own training manuals, and Disney is still putting out movies, and MK Ultra is still active. So there has to be a feedback loop somewhere in that system. I don't know if there's ever been an exposed CIA agent that was also like working in the animation department, but I feel like they were out there. They just kept it under good wraps.
I mean, they at least had their toe in the pool before because it's pre MK Ultra. But during the war, Disney was making government films, some of them classified. So, you know, when you're giving classified stuff, I guess you have classified information now.
You can find a lot of those too in like the I think they call the Prelinger archives, which is a whole collection of old commercials and shows, and some of them include declassified sort of top secret presentations back then. So you can actually find some of the ones that Disney helped produce on, I think, archive.org if you look for them.
They put some of them out themselves about 20 years ago. Just clearing, it was their vault DVDs, and one of them was wartime Disney. So uh, those sets are pretty interesting. I think I have a few sitting here, like Tomorrowland or something. But yeah. You know, some of them are just like about bomb casings. You know, they're not very interesting. It's like Donald Duck dealing with a bomb casing. So it's not
I
interesting.
would, in a very morbid and inappropriate way, I would love to see what the modern version of that would be. Like the Pixar version of, and here's how we deploy biochemical warfare, and here's how we, do drone drill bombings, and here's the effects of white phosphorus, kids. It would be such a surreal thing to see that the exact same thing just repeated today.
Woody's telling you about it. It's Tom Hanks's brother doing the voice in this case. That'd
Let
be
me tell you
great.
about Pizzagate, kids.
You have you heard about that? Apparently, outside of the Toy Story movies, when you hear Woody, it's usually Tom Hanks's brother. It was just like
What do
because
you mean?
like that's his way of like his brother I guess has a similar voice. So when you hear Woody in like a ride or maybe some of the straight to video stuff,
Interesting.
he tosses the bone to his brother so he can have that job because he's not a superstar I guess. So
I mean, well, AI is going to put him out of business pretty soon,
oh
so
yeah
he better milk that cow as long as he can.
yeah. I mean, there's plenty of weird things on that dude anyway, but in that case, that's kind of cool. Get throw your family a little bone where you can. a fun creative bone. That doesn't sound good. Okay.
And I was thinking too, I had a note here. What would the modern equivalent of this same Sword in the Stone legend be? Or even if it was literally a sword in the stone, I was just thinking like who would be showing up to pull this thing out? You'd have Elon Musk showing up and Jeff Bezos and just every sort of like tech mogul god, right? Would just be showing up with, like, Joe Rogan would probably show up, pumped up on creatine and growth hormone. But like, what would the techniques be? Like, what would they be trying to do? I almost feel like humanity at this point wouldn't try to find the right person. Everyone would be like developing lasers and special acids that would dissolve the stone, and like all of these high-tech shortcuts to get around it.
I feel like you have to have a physical icon in that case. So I'm going to go Steve Jobs. So he plucked the Apple computer from Steve Wozniak and it's now holding it up.
Well,
That's his.
and then he died from eating too many apples.
True. Well, he thought it was when he was a '70s hippie. Apparently, he thought that would be a good thing to try, but oops. But yeah, I feel like because the sword is you got to have that object to base it around, which I guess is why my brain goes to Steve
Well,
Jobs.
it's
What
a
would you have with
phallus,
Elon?
man. Let's not dance around it. It's a
Yeah.
1,000,000% a phallus. There's no other way to interpret the entire legend. It's literally like, can this kid whip it out, and is it big, and is it strong? And that's the whole entire equivalent of the entire story, right?
Yeah, basically. I don't know. So maybe we can go Elon Musk. He's got all his rockets.
You're not wrong, man. You're not wrong at all. And honestly, I think Elon might be a good candidate here, because there's a lot of correlations in my mind between, say, Elon and Jack Parsons, who also wanted to pierce the moon with his rockets in a very directly black magic, Crowleyan, way. So that there's definitely an aspect of passing the torch on here, even
So
if it's not, intentional, it's happening.
I mean, yeah, again, magic is technology, right? So what is the most impressive technology is the magician of the modern age, I suppose.
So, and I had another note here that I think my favorite scene that I remember the most from this, because again, I probably watched this particular VHS cassette more than any other, was the freaking wizard duel at the end. Because not only is a wizard duel probably the coolest two words you can put together in the human English language, but the actual sequence of all the different things they go through. And this is one of those elements where I really liked how they tied the animation and the story together, because as he goes through these sequence, right? So first it starts out as she turns into a pink gator, and then he turns into a turtle, and then she turns into a fox, and then he turns into a caterpillar, then she turns into a chicken. So it turns into this like a tit for tat. He does something and she goes a little bit bigger, and he keeps going small, because in that original scene when he's training Arthur as a little fish, he's telling him like, you have to figure out how to defend yourself even as this little small creature. And first he has to fend off the frog, and then it immediately elevates into, I'm going to say, a barracuda. I don't remember exactly what it was. Then he has to fight like a barracuda, and this gets completely replayed in that final scene, because again, Merlin is staying these little tiny animals versus this big animal, and he has to kind of outsmart it. And he does some of the exact same moves that Arthur does, where he swims through the little link in the chain to kind of like outsmart, the big fish that's chasing him. And something very similar where Merlin turns into a little caterpillar and he sneaks into a log, and then she gets stuck into the log. So like I love that aspect of, just from a storytelling perspective, of like, it's a callback, it's a really cool callback of, here, I'm going to re-show you what you kind of learned earlier, and here's how you apply it in an actual freaking wizard duel. But I love that part. And then again, to put the bow on top of the very ending, I saw your note here, but yeah, Merlin turns into a pandemic essentially. They milk it down, because it's like, oh yeah, you'll be fine. You're just going to be bedridden for 2 weeks. You're going to need sunlight, because there might be a vitamin D deficiency. And then you're going to basically be bedridden and, weak until you get over this, which just kind of like puts you out. So that the witch is working from home for a couple weeks at least. Which, yeah, it feels like if you did that in modern day, uh, it would happen, right? Like, maybe Merlin is with us now, and he might have had a little hand in this, just bumbling around.
Well, he'd certainly know about it, wouldn't he? Coming from the future and all.
Well, and since he's got that quantum leap dynamic where he can like replay and know how things need to happen in order for that to happen, there's almost like that God paradox, right? Like, if you're omnipotent and you still allow it to happen, and you're omniscient as well, then you're kind of part of the system, right? So Merlin in that way is sharing some of the responsibility for every tragedy that has ever happened in history since the 1100, based on the premise this movie sets up.
Yeah. Although I guess there is the idea if you were to change those events, you'd butterfly effect it, right?
Maybe, although isn't that what Merlin's doing? Is I mean, he's leading that kid into the little hut in the woods so that he can train him to pull that sword out. Like, that's at least that's what the movie starts out with. I know where Arthur is right now. Here's what he's doing. Here's his current reaction, and therefore implying everything's going according to plan. That's sort of that the original premise this entire movie starts out on, is that Merlin is just watching this chess game unfold and has some kind of influence over where the pieces are set.
One other thing that I feel like in the modern day, we tend to think that Arthurian legend would be more like 600, 700 date wise, you know?
Well,
And
I looked up specifically on when the general accepted range of when this particular Sword in the Stone story would have taken place, and it ranges from like 800 to 1100 or so. But yeah, the actual Arthurian legend wouldn't line up quite well with the same story that results in this old dude taking this little kid away and then flying off to Bermuda.
I mean, I guess part of the charm of the legends is that there just isn't like a, one solid source to go to. So, depending on how you come at it, it could be quite different from different angles. So, a historian's going to be looking at something very different than, say, literature person, you know?
Well, yeah, that's the same thing that sends a literature person out into the woods and think that they're going to turn into a survivalist because of all the romantic notions behind it, right?
Yeah, because like I'm thinking right now, what if I just like screwed off into the mountains? I mean, I'd like be a ninja. I'm in Japan. This is actually ninja country, man. But yeah, I'd obviously like very quickly fail for most likely.
So I've got a dumb American question, but is there an equivalent of like a survivalist in Japan, or is that just considered rural? Or is there like a specific, I don't know, like in America, there's a very specific niche of survivalists and homesteaders where they intentionally want to get off the grid so that they don't rely on big government for electricity and supplies and, regulation and stuff. But it's very much like a political independent. I want to live off the grid and outside of like the big brother's eye, almost as like a defiant, revolutionary aspect to it. And they tend to, hunt and shoot their own meat and build their log cabins and everything. Is there a direct equivalent in Japan to that same kind of concept?
I would say no, especially not politically, but in some mountain places there are family homes and even some elderly people living in places that have basically been forgotten. So they just kind of accidentally live off the grid. I guess
Okay.
that's part of
Yeah.
an aging society. You start, as the population gets older, you start forgetting about certain places.
The kids stop visiting and showing off all the new technology. So there's some places out in Japan where the last time they've seen a phone was like the old Nokia brick, and they haven't seen a new one since.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's probably stores where you can go buy one. Just it's like this family business that's just still there for some reason. And mom and pa are now 80 years old, and I don't know what they're doing. But
So I guess there's not some like an idea of, I'm sick with modern technology in the modern world and I'm just gonna turn into a homesteader. Like, is there that version anywhere?
not really. I think it's one thing, like unless it's necessary, Japanese folks probably aren't going to share their opinions about much. Like you don't really know what anyone's political opinions are, which is yeah, I guess quite different than America these days. But
Well, everyone's got it on their shirt or the bumper sticker on the back of their car. You don't even have to ask. You already know.
yeah, there's no bumper stickers on the car, and yeah, people want to avoid conflict. That's like a Eastern vibe, avoiding conflict. So sharing opinions forthright tends to start conflicts. Of course, sometimes it's great to just get in a nice debate, but that's kind of the American thing. Japanese don't want to do that so much. So yeah, so I'm gonna say here's what we have in Japan. We have the I haven't seen them so much recently, but political seasons. They're going around these black vans. They're very like, you know, like they were like Japan was at its best in the 30s.
Wait, what?
There's a political party that goes around in black vans, kind of like xenophobic, and I feel like their basic vibe is Japan was like on the right path, like in the 30s when it had like a hardcore insulated government and started a war. I guess I don't know. Um,
What would that look like though? Just Japanese only, and does that mean you're out?
yeah, yeah, they don't, yeah, they don't seem like too keen on bringing in foreigners, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's kind of xenophobic. To be fair, I haven't seen them much in the past 6 years or so, but before that, I do remember seeing them during political seasons around more. So
Is that the only change? Is you just see black vans every once in a while, and otherwise you wouldn't know that there's a political campaigns going on, or does it envelop society in a bigger way than that?
you just get, like loud vans driving around with different political parties. People like waving from the windows. It's noise pollution. In Japan, usually people are very try not to be noisy, but the rules go out the window for political season for some reason, and you're allowed to just drive around making a ton of noise.
Interesting. And whoever annoys you the most gets your vote. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I guess. Well, the status
That's
quo usually gets
sounds
the
like the
votes.
premise, right?
That's how Abe got assassinated. He was doing one of those stops with one of those vans, and someone came up. So that also, I'm curious in the next few election cycles if that's like doesn't happen as much anymore.
Do they not have like little Pope mobiles with the little bulletproof glass where they can just kind of like wave and the bullets just bounce off?
No, sometimes they're on the roof, like just out open air Kennedy style.
Hmm.
So they
Yeah,
didn't
we
didn't
America
quite win that
learned
one.
its lesson after that one for sure.
So I am curious if Abe being, of course, Japan has also had prime ministers and ex prime ministers publicly assassinated before. It's been a while.
I think it's just one of those coming of age things that every sort of government and society goes through, right? You have to have one of your leaders assassinated before you turn into like a legit sort of country, like an established power. You have to have a couple assassinations under your belt.
um, I do need to wind down, but just one other thing about the Abe thing. The guy that shot him basically achieved his goal. Do you know the motivation in that
No,
shooting?
no, I mean, I remember it in the news, but I never looked into it beyond that.
Basically, the Moonies, the Unification Church, I think, or whatever it's
Oh
called,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Moonies had.
Washington Post, right? Or Washington something or other.
Yeah, so they basically insinuated themselves with lobbying and bribes and things like that into the ruling party of Japan, the LDP. And his mother had been like basically, left out to dry because of giving contributions to this religious organization that's tied in with this political party. So he was like, I want people to know about this. And since he's done that, well, again, you should never shoot anyone. But since then, now everybody knows that this party's been in cahoots with the Moonies. Several cabinet posts have had to leave because of it. So I'm like, well, he actually did achieve his goal. That's kind of weird.
Well, and that's interesting because the Moonies have shaped American culture in quite a big way too.
Right.
I
So it's
mean,
really,
there's a lot of conspiracy theories that came specifically from Mooney newspapers and were like the original, sort of purveyors of a lot of those theories.
but yeah, his goal was to bring it to light. Now it is to light. So again, never shoot anyone. I mean, I think they've been psychologically assessing him for 6 months. Who knows what that means? But I think they're
Are
going to
there are
start.
there any like conspiracy theories within Japan about that? Like, oh, it was a government hit, or it was an inside job, or it was a mind control operation, or any of
I
those?
I haven't heard much about that. It seemed the guy had a really specific goal that actually that's the weird thing. Usually, an assassin doesn't really what's his name did not impress Jodie Foster. So but yeah, so what he did is horrible, but he actually succeeded, I guess, which is interesting.
I
uh,
mean, again, the Moonies are at least efficient in the crazy stuff that they do.
yeah, and that's been headline news ever since in Japan. So yeah, kind of weird. um I do need to wind this one down, but did you have any final points you wanted to throw out on this movie?
Well, yeah, it used to be my favorite, I thought, until I wish I wouldn't have done the historical research at all, and especially not before I rewatched it. I really do wish I had just watched the movie first and then been like, oh, this is interesting that there's these extra connotations. But again, now I'm never gonna be able to watch this movie again and not see this old dude luring a little kid into the woods. It's just the weirdest scene, and I really wish that I hadn't have gone through that experience, because I feel like a little part of me died in the process of doing that. And I almost don't want to do any research into Robin Hood. I want to just watch the movie, but I might still do that one. But man, if anyone ruins Robin Hood for me, I'm gonna be absolutely devastated by the next time we get to that.
You could do it in the opposite order because I tell people we're not out to like destroy these movies because we're not, but yeah, we might have given
I
this one a swift
again,
kick
this
in
is
the
my
crotch.
favorite love. I love this movie. I'll still love the movie. And again, it's not like the movie did anything wrong or the animators or the people that adapted the screenplay did anything horrible. And even the original author, I'm not even saying that he did anything bad. And in fact, there's a lot of mixed sort of criticisms and stories of his, biographies based on Th White, and lots of debate over what his real life and his struggles really were. But he absolutely was a tortured soul, and it came out in these books. And the movie just re-emphasized a lot of those sort of archetypes. But it did inspire me. I want to read the original 4 or 5 books because it seems like there might be some really interesting kind of like human story element to that, like just this kid that grew up in a cruel world and he hated it so much that he retreated into nature, but he wasn't able to cut it in nature, so they just kind of like wrote fantasy versions of people that were able to turn into animals and communicate with animals and just vibe with nature because they were so removed from cruel humanity. And this kind of just like persisted throughout his entire life. So I feel like the things that he wrote were definitely worth checking out. But yeah, look into his backstory only if you want to be creeped out and not be able to watch this movie in the same way, or even read the books again. Because I imagine you invest all that time in reading the books, there's a lot more detail. And I almost wish I had read them before this, but that'll be have to be like a side project. That'll be extra credit.
Yeah, I had that thought, but I was like, yeah, it's still a pretty thick book.
It's yeah, there's a number of them too. We're because you can't just do the first one. You'd have to read all the way up until the fifth book.
Right. Well, for this movie, you get away with first, but yeah, yeah, it is a proper epic, of
Well,
course.
not really though, because you have to read the fifth book about Merlin to know if he really goes to Bermuda or not.
Oh yeah, good point. Oh, this is the last one, Bermuda, is it?
Because again,
Okay.
if he lives in the future, then Merlin's story isn't, set in just that first book. You'd have to read all of them and maybe even read them in reverse order based on your original theory, right? That he's actually living in reverse time where he starts in the future and works his way back to Arthur.
I guess I'm thinking Tenet. Isn't that how Tenet works? He's got
And,
a
and, and
turnstile somewhere.
so actually there is one other thing I'd like to drop. Since you mentioned Tenet, which is such an interesting coincidence, because Tenet, the basis for that movie's name is from a magical square. I think it's the square of Saturn specifically. And then the way that you create these little magical squares is making a little grid of the planet's number. So it would be like a 6x6 or a 7x7, depending on what planet you go with. So Tenet is a 5x5, right? Tenet, 5-letter word. And the way that you can put it on this magical square, and I think it's called also the Satori square, it might be. And it's very related to this concept of abracadabra, because abracadabra was a similar magical incantation that took the form of a shape, but abracadabra was a triangle or like a little pyramid. And the way that you would write it is you would start with the whole word and then write under it and just keep removing one letter from it as you would go down, and it would be able to spell itself in multiple ways that you would look at it. And in this movie, they say Alakazam a lot, and they say a couple other ones that are sort of similar, but those are all variations on abracadabra. So there's an interesting link between the word abracadabra and the word Tenet and the concept that bridges both of those together, which is sort of this combination of magic and gematria and geometry.
So maybe Robert Pattinson is our modern, excuse me, our modern Merlin. I don't know. He's the one going backwards, I think. It's been a while. I watched it once, and you probably have to watch it twice, I guess.
Or yeah, 4 or 5 or 6 times. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I've
then
I've
I'm
got a few movie buff friends that are absolutely convinced that Tenet includes all sorts of esoteric information, and that like they're giving away, sort of the recipe to all sorts of black magic in there. I haven't found it myself yet,
you see,
but
for me,
maybe
looking for that sort of thing in a Kubrick movie is like fun, but looking for an antenna just seems like it would be a headache.
you're not wrong. Yeah, you're not wrong at all.
I mean, the movie's fine, but I did, yeah, but It just seems like trying to crack that egg would be like more trouble than it's worth. I don't know.
Well, so we're a ways away from getting to AI. I think AI was a Disney movie, wasn't it, or no?
I'm not
Or it was
sure.
Spielberg, so
Oh,
probably not.
no, it wasn't a
Uh,
Spielberg. He's
but yeah,
casting those
talking
buddies.
about Kubrick and occultism and secrets, the I recently found out that the original screenplay for AI was vastly different than anything remotely close to what Spielberg ended up doing with it. And you can find some of Kubrick's original notes in his own archives in his little boxes. We have to like have some sort of a degree or like an actual research intent in order to get access to them. But the original notes for AI was just 100% occultism. It was like an alchemical workbook, essentially.
Well, I guess Eyes Wide Shut achieved that to some degree anyway. So,
I mean, yeah, there's a whole extra theory in there is that he didn't get to put his version out because he revealed too much of it.
yeah, I love that little bit. Like, there's 20 minutes more of the party that we don't see or something.
That and it was shot in the Rothschild Mansion, which is the same place that something called the Surreal Ball of 1970 something. They did it multiple times, and it was hosted. I think like their guest invite was Salvador Dali at one point. But a lot of that movie was based on like those costume balls, and then mixed with a little, the little kinky sex orgy part.
Yeah, but yeah, that's its own can of worms, I guess. I do need a shutter for today, but this is late February, I believe. Anything you want to throw out there?
Yeah, just paranoidamerican.com. The new website is going great. I've got all of the comics now in digital form. So if you don't want to worry about shipping or figuring out how to get it to, your various countries. And by the way, we are shipping in Japan. So if you go on Amazon and search for Paranoid American, you should be able to find almost all of our books in English so far. But yeah, and the website, if you want to just download a version of a lot of our comics and books, so paranoidamerican.com, and we'll probably be doubling the amount of titles available by the end of this year. So lots more of specific titles to share with you in the coming episodes.
As for me, I do all the podcasting here, of course. I call it Disney. We talk about sci-fi films at Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary, The Twilight Zone at Time Enough podcast, and I mentioned we're doing The Prisoner right now. So the name of that, which several people have given me weird looks when I tell them the name of that podcast, which is Imprisoned in Prison, an The Prisoner Prison Cast. So that's the name of that one.
You should get
Okay.
that as a .com.
Yeah, probably.
It might be
uh,
available.
you never know. It gets weird. And it's out already, so someone could have grabbed it,
Right.
Okay, well, I'm going to go scuttle off into the woods and see if I can pull a stone out of a sword.
Yeah,
Stone out of a sword. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah.
go find a cute squirrel and yeah, figure out what to do with it.